Hi, welcome to the BizFlo Clearing Solution. This is an overview video to just give you a rundown of some of the features of the application. Here we're logging in as a branch teller. The application uses 2FA, typically with Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, but we are able to connect to any third-party authentication provider that the bank may have. This is the dashboard of the application. It's like the main landing page. So this is the first screen that the user will encounter. On the screen, you have the various, here you can see the various clients, in this case, head office. Here we have what we call applications. There's branch, in-house, inward, outward, and return. Then under the applications, we have what we call processes. So under the branch, you have branch outward, branch in-house, and then you have your branch neft. You have your in-house, which is internal bank transactions. Then you have your inward, which are transactions coming from NIBs into the bank. You have your inward check and inward neft. You have your outward check and your outward neft, which are transactions initiated from the bank and going out to NIBs. And then you have your return, which are transactions that were sent out and have been returned back from NIBs. So we have some of the details of the currently logged in user. Then the application is multilingual. So for example, if you have French here, so the purpose of this is in case a bank goes international, you don't need to buy another application for your separate divisions in other countries. You can adjust the theme of the application. So, for example, some people have problems with their eyes; they can't work with bright screens. So you can adjust the brightness or the darkness of the theme of the application to what suits your preference. And this is peculiar to each individual user, by the way. So at this point, we'll be focusing on the branch neft. That's the first place we're going to start our walkthrough. And for that, we'll click on the branch neft or outward neft application. So this is our outward neft application. If you see, generally speaking, there are various modules available within this application. Here you can see I'm trying to click on the user is trying to click on the supervisor, but you can only click on what you have the right to click. So there are permissions for everything. Yeah. So you can see it doesn't have the right to click on supervisor because it doesn't have that particular permission. It can only work on the FT officer module. Then we also have post-dated and debit notes. Post-dated just means transactions in the future. Debit notes is used by clearing for sending out debit to other banks. It's not really the focus of this particular video, but you should be aware that such a feature exists. Okay, so the first step is we create a stack. A stack is essentially just a folder. In our own terminology, you have what we call stack, we have batch, and then we have record. So a stack is a folder, batch is like a subfolder, and your record are your individual instruments. So the stack has been created. So we'll come to the credits. area. So the debit note, like we mentioned, is specifically for if the bank wants to retrieve funds from other banks. In times past, we used to create a virtual instrument, but nowadays NIPS recommends using net debit. So that's why we're showing you that module. Now, the first step for generating an outward net is you specify your source account. Okay, so we'll just copy that from there. This is the person that the funds are going to be taken out from the account, the source of the transaction. When you click on the validate button, the purpose of this is to confirm that the account is actually valid. Okay, so the account has validated. You can see the details of the particular customer. Now, there's something called debit type. With the application, BizFlo supports single or bulk. Single just means that each individual, say you do 5 transactions, the person will see 5 debits in their account. If you decide to do bulk, there will be a single bulk debit in the person's account. And but so basically, essentially, single debit and then five separate transactions will be sent out to NIBS. And when you specify bulk, obviously you have to put a narration for the bulk transaction because you can't carry any of the narrations of the individual transactions. So you have to specify for the bulk. That's what we showed you there. Then the next thing you need to specify is your destination. These are the details of the receiving bank, the bank that's going to receive the funds. So there are two ways of specifying it. The first way is via a form, and the second way is via an Excel schedule. So we have a particular file format which we will show you in this video. With the Excel, that's the standard ways. For example, if you're paying salaries, the it's not something you want to be imputing one by one. It doesn't make much sense to do that. So that's why we created this feature that allows the bank to be able to upload a schedule containing all the transactions. It has a specific format that needs to be followed. But the purpose of this video will show you both, how they both function. So for the individual destination, we'll select GT code there. Okay, let's copy one account from there. You put the name of the receiver, and then you input your amount. And finally, you input the narration. You click add next. So you can see the transaction right there. Now we move over to the next input method, which is via Excel. So the first step is to download our template, which you see us doing right here. It's in Excel format. So we open that up with Excel. This is what the form looks like when it's filled up. So you have your amount, you have your transaction details, beneficiary account, beneficiary name, and then the bank, the receiving bank. So here we maintain the list of the bank codes. The Excel file will also validate to make sure that the user does not input wrong details like a non-existent bank. So once the details have been filled up, the user goes into the application, selects the Excel file, and then clicks upload. So typically what we do at this point, you can see the two files from the Excel have been added to the previous one we created manually. Typically what we do, we now do a validation, name validation against your NIP name service, the same service you use when you are doing your NIP transactions. The purpose is to confirm that the names match. It's not mandatory that they need to match, but most times if it doesn't match, the receiving bank is going to reject it. So at this point, the user has to do a name validation just to be sure that they are certain they want to send these transactions. So you click on validate web. So normally the names will display here on that particular column, beneficiary name, web. And if you see them amber like this particular color, what that means is there's a mismatch, or like in this case now, the service is unavailable. Sometimes the NIP service can actually go down, and that's why we don't make it mandatory. But it's a good to have feature. So at this point, you import the records, click on continue. So the records are actually being imported into the system. Okay, so once the records have been uploaded, you can begin processing. Normally, the first step for outward neft is that the user it goes through an approval process. One thing to note in our application is a workflow driven application. So if you look at this particular column, it shows you the particular work step that the application is going through. So some of these work steps are work steps that are automated by the system. Some of them are user work steps that involve user input. So typically the first step is to, okay, for the supervisor to approve the transaction. We just want to give you a quick glimpse of our workflow engine. Yeah, so this is the workflow for outward neft. It's a very simple workflow. The workflows for some of the other processes like inward neft, inward check, or outward check, they're a bit more complicated than this. But outward net is straightforward. It comes in, goes for approval. So you can see some items have gone for approval on your screen there. That's supervisor approval. Okay, so back in the application, you can see at that point supervisor BFT approval. That means the items are awaiting approval. Okay, so we're going to sign out right now and sign in as a supervisor. You have to show you the approval process. As usual, we do 2FA. So you input your token. So the user can click there and work on the process on the records individually, or they can go via the outward neft application and do them in bulk. Once again, you can see that the supervisor cannot click the modules that are not meant for him. Can only click the supervisor module. So you can see the items that we saw earlier. The purpose is like a kind of maker checker. The purpose of the supervisor is to review the items to make sure that there's nothing shady and there are no inappropriate or unauthorized transactions. So just click approve. You can do it in bulk or you can do it individually for each record. Yeah. So those records have been approved there. So they've gone back to the teller. At this point, the teller can continue the processing of the instruments. So we'll sign out and log back in as the teller. Okay, we're back into the outward depth application. So the next step is to post the records. In this case, we are debiting the customer. And like we said earlier, the number of transactions that will display in the user's account is depending on whether you selected single or bulk debit. So if you see the work step, BPF direct posting, what that means is BFT direct posting. What that means is that we have a service that does the debiting into the customer's account, into the sender's account. There, so it's done, posted. So all the items have been posted. You see it has changed to green. Typically, the next step is just to transfer the stack. By transfer, what it means is you are sending the stacks from the branch to clearing. At which point, clearing will now make a decision on whether to send the item to NIPS or if they want to reject those transactions. So clearing is like a watch, or how do we put it? It's like a second level check to ensure that items from the branch are valid before they are sent out to NIPS. And the user can view the previous ones that they've worked on. Like that's what we're displaying here. If you go to the ones that are, that's why we selected closed at the top. You can see the previous stacks that were generated in the application. So we sign out now and we go in as the clearing user. And we'll show you the process of sending the files out to NIPS at this point. Okay, so this is the dashboard for the clearing user. There are certain things that are available to clearing that are not available by the branches. Like this is the admin page, for example. We'll go to outward neft, go to host download. Host download typically is because this application we can initiate from either from the branches or we can fetch also from your host, from your core banking, if you have other channels for outward neft. So normally the step at this point, the clearing user will simply click on download and fetch the items. They also have the option because sometimes at the branch they might initiate a transaction and then before the thing is sent out, the user might decide that they don't want to send that particular transaction out. What we do can reject a record. So that's what we've done here. You can see that particular item has gone red. So typically when you reject an item, what it means is that you want to do a cash back Cashback just means that you want to refund the user their money. So by the time you download these items, that particular instrument that was rejected will follow a separate pathway in the workflow to do the cashback to the user's account, while the normal other transactions that have not been rejected will follow the normal route and go to NIPS. But in this case now, we, for the purpose of this particular um, walkthrough, we're just going to, we will undo the rejection that we did. So the item has, all the items are green, and then you download. So all the items from all the branches, they will appear here for clearing users to download. Similarly, items from other channels will also appear there. For those ones, you will need to give us an API for us to be able to fetch them for you and send them out to NIPS. So at this point, for the clearing people, there isn't really much processing to do. It's outward neft. There's some little few processing that we do, but typically we don't do much. So for example, here we have um, okay, this is an example of an item that was singled out by the system. So if we click on that, you will see why it was singled out by the application. There you can see check digits was invalid. So normally your NIPS NACS, the NACS gateway by NIPS is going to reject items that are not valid Nubank accounts. So that's why our own application separated it. So in this case now, we did a check to make sure that the Nubank is valid, aside from the name check that we did earlier. So, but if you're okay with it, the user can just say okay and save. Okay, so once it's at this very work step, what it means is that it's ready for transmission. You can see OC NACS FTC. That means it's waiting for sending to the NACS gateway. NACS meaning Nigerian Automated Clearing um, System. There, so select Add Tags to Clearing Session. Continue. Select the items that you want to transmit to NIPS. Continue. And then you post to Nax Direct. That means you are actually pushing it to the wherever we call Nax Direct or Nax Gateway. It's basically a platform where we send files to NIPS and then receive files from NIPS. So you select the banks you want to include. You determine if you want it to be um, transmitted instantly or you want it to be paused, meaning that somebody else needs to review it first. So this is the NAS gateway platform that we're opening right now. There. So we refresh. You can see the items, they are blue, meaning they are paused. The reason we did that is sometimes we know in clearing, sometimes some banks want to have only supervisors um, with the ability to send items out so that your normal user that is not a supervisor will not have access to that. So that's why we have that option of pausing items as a sort of last check. Like, are you sure? Do you really want to send out to NIPS? So if the clearing people decide to change their mind at that point, is that's the last opportunity they have to change their minds. If for whatever reason you send an item that and you later discover that you did not want to send it, at that point you have to go through the recall process via email. So that's why we give steps in order to avoid the bank having to send out emails to other banks and say, "Ah, please don't pay this particular NEF transactions." Okay, so we move quickly to the outward check application. This is where what the branch uses to scan checks and then to send out to NIPS. Typically, this is an other bank's check that has been deposited by your customer at the branch, and it needs to be sent to the paying bank. So you create a stack. It's similar to the outward nerve process. You create a stack, which, like we said earlier, it's a folder. You have option of direct posting or non-direct posting. You have option of post-dated or non-post-dated. Post-dated meaning future checks. So a user can actually deposit checks that are meant for in the future, and our application will store it for you and transmit it on the due date. This is our scanning application, the only web-based scanning application in the country as far as we are aware. So you select the particular scanner that you want to connect to. If you look at the bottom, you can see the details of the scanner. This is a TS240 scanner by Telascan. Um, the interesting thing, because it's web-based, you can actually connect to a scanner on a node that is not necessarily connected to the user's PC. It could be connected to a separate PC, dedicated PC just for scanning. The advantage of this is that you can actually have multiple tellers connected to just one scanner. So that's one neat feature of having a web-based scanning solution. If without it being web-based, you can't have that possibility. So here we are scanning some checks. There you can see the two checks that we've scanned just now. That's one First Bank. That's one UBA bank. So there, like we said, mentioned earlier, you have what we call batch. Batch just means that this particular set of checks they came together. Is a way of grouping checks. So you have stack, which is the main overall folder. And then you have batch, meaning these are a set of checks that came together as a batch. So it's just like a subfolder. So that's what you have there on the left side, the batch creation fields. So you input your account number of the depositor. So that's the name of the depositor. Then you input who dropped the check. It's just for record purposes. Sometimes the depositor is not necessarily the person that brought the check. Then we also have a balancing process. Balancing just means that you input the total number of checks and the total amount. What this does, it forces the user to count the checks and also to tally up the amount. And what's the purpose of that? Again, for correctness, to avoid errors. Because as when you will see later, there's a correction process. Once because at that point the user is going to input the amount of each of the checks. But because of the balancing, we can actually do a comparison between the total of what the user inputs at the correction stage and the total that was calculated when the batch was being created, as a kind of second level check to make sure that the user is inputting the correct amounts. So that's we're done with scanning. We come to the where the processing is done. So you can see the work step is teller correction. That means the teller needs to do the correction. And then this is where we open our correction clients. There, so you see the items. One of the features that this application has, the BizFlo, is we do an OCR, optical character recognition. Typically, your scanner is going to scan the mica, which is magnetic ink character recognition or magnetic image character recognition. And then we will now do an OCR, optical character recognition, and match them. So if there's a difference between the two, you will see that symbol that you see in yellow there, record mismatch. So what is complaining about is telling you that the the check number that we recognize using OCR is different from the check number that the scanner recognizes using mica. It's a very nice feature, and the purpose is to prevent fraud, because normally when people want to defraud the bank, they tamper with mica fields at the bottom. But when you have two ways of recognizing these mica fields, that's a plus. At least the user, it can be warned that there's a mismatch. There's a difference between what we are seeing and what the scanner is seeing. So normally the user just needs to input the fields that are handwritten, like the amount, the issue date, the amount and the issue date. And the okay, the depositor account was imputed earlier, and then issuer as well. So here you can see us imputing the amount. You can put it the full figure, in this case 50,000, or you can say 50K. The system will automatically recognize it. Or say you wanted to put 1.5 M, you can see the system will fill it out. This is just to these are just convenience method for the user. So once the amount has been imputed, also the system will check if the amount is more than 10 million, because check processing doesn't allow more than 10 million. So for the issue date, you can just key in a date like this, 2.2.25. There, it says stale item not allowed. Why? Because this particular item is more than 6 months old, which is against clearing rules. If we put something in the future, again, you see post-dated item not allowed. Again, because that's against clearing rules in Nigeria, CBN rules. Post-dated items are not allowed. The only time you can put post-dated items in this application is at the point when you are creating the stack, you specify that it's a post-dated stack, meaning it's not meant to be processed now. Then the system will allow you to input post-dated. But for a normal stack, the system does not allow that. Typically, the issuer, we usually use the NIP name service to fetch the issuer so that your user does not need to manually type the issuer. But and if you look at the narration, you can see FBN check slash slash the serial number. So the FBN check shows that the system automatically recognizes that it's a first bank check. You see, we didn't type that manually. This is what the system generates. Those are the transaction details that are going to be seen in the user's account. Now let's put in the issuer, which is the the name on the check, the actual issue of the check. Like we said, normally the NIP service will bring this up, but for this our demo, we didn't have access to the NIP service. So it has to be keyed in manually. And you can see the transaction detail has been updated with the full issuer name. And then you key in your BVN, which is mandatory by the BVN of the receiver, which is a mandatory field from NIPS. It doesn't really need to. The NIP service will actually bring that out. It's meant to bring that out, but Nigerian banks don't release that information. So you just need to key in any value and NIPS will accept it. If you look at the bottom, you see the account state, by the way, it shows you that this account is dormant. And then we do virtual endorsement. If you see at the top there where we've highlighted, what that does is like a virtual crossing stamp. Instead of the user having to manually stamp the checks, you can do away with manual stamping completely with this application, because we use software to generate the crossing stamp both on the front of the check and at the back of the check. So that's another time-saving feature of the BizFlo Clearing Solution. If you look at the bottom here, so we're just trying to zoom in here. There you can see that was auto-generated by the application. It's a crossing stamp and is mandatory by NIPS, by CBN. Sorry, we're zooming out again. You can also zoom in and zoom out depending on the eyesight of the user, because not everybody can see clearly. So that's why we're just showing you that. So it's a browser-based application. So whatever features the browser has, you can take advantage of that in the application. So we're done with that correction. Yeah, so this is the second item. This particular one, we deliberately altered some of the fields just to demonstrate how our system can help you prevent fraud. So for the check number, you see the scanner read 2, but the OCR is seeing it as 8. So our system will flag it that there's a mismatch. Likewise, the account number, if you see we doctored one of the fields where you have 913, on the actual check, it shows 918, but the mica is read 913. So that's a record mismatch. That's an example of what we mean by fraud prevention using OCR mica recognition, OCR mica matching. Okay, so we input the amount, let's say 105,000. We'll input the issue date. We input the issuer, and then lastly the BVN of the receiver on the other bank, which obviously you don't have. And you say okay, save and continue. Sure. Okay, at this point we're going to log in as the supervisor. Again, we do make a checker. For some banks, our default is 100,000 and above for our maker checker. So, but it depends on whatever limit a bank decides. A bank can decide that 200,000, 100,000, or even all items should go for maker checker. It's really dependent, and you can do it as a global default or individually per teller. So let's say, depending on the teller's level, you can increase their limit for how much. I mean, for the kind of items that they can process without needing approval. So for the approval, what we've discovered is that some supervisors will just be clicking approve without actually inspecting the check. So what we do is we make sure that they key in the check number, the amount, and the account number. These are the three most critical fields on the check. The purpose is to make sure that the supervisor actually paid attention. So you can see they put the wrong value initially, the thing flagged it, and then they put in the right value. It said okay, good, it went green. The same goes for the amounts. If you put in the wrong amount, the system will not recognize it. It complains about mismatch until the supervisor actually keys in the exact amount that the teller put in, then it goes green. Tell me the account number. So this is just a way of ensuring that the supervisor actually does their job, a proper maker checker, not just clicking approve, approve, approve. So at which point this particular instrument has been approved. Then you save. Okay, so we're going to log back in as we're going to sign out from the supervisor and go back into our FT officer, our teller, to round up the processing. At this point, items have been approved. That's why they're showing blue. Say postal records. You can see it says batch not balance. If you remember earlier when we were creating the batch, we imputed the total number of records and then the total amount. So the system has flagged it that the amount doesn't tally with the total. So at this point, you cross check. Was there an error at the point when the amount was being imputed during the correction? Or was there an error at the initial stage when the batch was being created? That's the purpose of this balancing module. So in this case, let's assume that there was a mistake in the initial batch. So we just adjust that and there it shows green. So what that means is at this point, the batch is balanced. So we're practically done with processing. The next step is just to post these items and then send it to clearing. At which point clearing will collect all the individual items and send to NIPS. So send to direct posting, yes. So there we see the items, they've gone to direct posting. At which point the processing is more or less identical with the NEFT.